everyone. My name is Tom Slater, Director at T2S Architecture Limited, and your host for the DesignA.I podcast. DesignA.I looks to explore how artificial intelligence is impacting the world of architecture, design, and the wider creative industries through candid conversations with those leading the build for the future. Artificial intelligence is indeed powerful, but how can human creativity, endeavor, and innovation evolve alongside it? To discuss that and many other things today, we are delighted to be joined by Alex Mohacs, one day journalist, the next day AI consultant. Alex, delighted to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
Amazing. So yeah, let's just touch upon that. If you could just talk through how you got to what you're currently doing, how you got there, and move on from there.
Totally. So what I currently do is, well, if you're going to put a title to it, and so many of these roles have new titles because they're being invented as we go, right? I mean, at the beginning of the year, we had no idea that we'd be working, and we're only halfway through 2026. So it really is changing super fast. And if you're going to put a title to the thing I do right now, it would be something like an AI outcomes manager. And these roles are becoming increasingly prevalent as companies try and actually get some value out of their implementation of AI. What is value? I normally say it's just like let's try and get it down to a dollar figure. So they might say, if we're going to implement AI, it's going to cost us this much, and I need to make more out of it because, exposure isn't value. Adoption isn't value. Burning tokens isn't value. The CFO is going to go, it's costing us this much. I want it to make us more than it costs. And these emerging roles like an AIOM, AI outcomes manager, go into companies and they try and make sure that you're working with the right AI in the right systems and you're doing it in the right way. And you have a measurable metric at the end, which demonstrates that it's actually doing something valuable for the business and you're not using it just because everybody else is, and you're using it in the right way. And that's what I do. Really, the practicalities of it is it's good old-fashioned change management. It's a people process. It's about 80% people, 20% tech. The tech bit is actually pretty simple comparatively. The people bit is super complicated because you can implement AI in two ways. You can either do it at the edge, which is there are so many analogies and metaphors, right? We're just drowning in them. I quite like to, where possible, keep things grounded in a practical implementation. But you might say a process is a bit like a chain. A chain is a collection of links, and that is what the business does. And so AI at the edge is taking that process, taking that chain, looking at every single link and replacing it with an automation. Whereas AI at the core is taking that process, the product that the company makes. The company, it might make, coffee. It might do design. It might be an architecture firm. They all have a product. They all have inputs, which is like human hours, and outputs, which is the product they sell. And the process is, the thing that sits between those two. And AI at the core would be actually saying, you invented your process before generative AI came along, which was kind of like 2020-ish. Is that process that you invented and you put in place then still relevant now? Or now that you've got these new tools, and they are really powerful, right? Is this still the right process for that job? Or do we kind of redesign the way the team works, the way the team sits, right? Are designers better placed working closer to developers? If you're going to do in the software kind of, metaphor, or the software industry, are developers better working closer in the design phase of, you begin to reevaluate everything. And then you can actually come up with like a really efficient way of doing what you used to do, producing what you used to produce, or even being able to produce something that you never even considered because it was just like outright impossible initially. You didn't even give it the time of day because you're like, we can't do that, right? We don't have enough people, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough hours. It's just, so we don't even consider it. now you can begin to consider those things, but only when you look at what you do and you build at the core. So to loop all the way back, what do I do? What does an outcomes manager do? What does an AI OM do? That's the type of thing that we do. We go into companies and we generally know what works, what doesn't work, what the current state of the art is, the economics of it, what it's great at, what it's terrible at. And then we can look at the process and we can kind of begin to say, yeah, it will work really well there. It won't work at all over there. So you just continue working the way you're working because that's as good as it's going to get. It does this really well. It does that really badly. And help companies actually work in a practical and pragmatic way.
Amazing. And it very much feels like you're right in the middle of, wouldn't want to use the word storm, but I think in terms of the blowing up as from 2020, as you describe it, of that AI technology, you're obviously right in the heart of that. What I'm just interested in exploring, first of all, is how did you get there? I noticed, obviously, researching the podcasting yourself, there's a lot of journalism in there, there's product designs or software design, if you will. So tell us about how you've ended up in this AI storm.
Yeah, totally. So it's probably about 3 or 4 big moves. Started off as a business and tech journalist, networks like CNN, ITN, just in the newsroom producing all those shows. And then there was a moment when I was sitting in the archive, like in the basement of one of these big news agencies, right? And we're trying to find a clip. And clips, this is like 2015. So this is when we still had deterministic software. And clips, back then, you would find a clip, right, by searching through the metadata of the file. So it was just like a file name, right? And when that came in and it got logged by the cameraman or the producer or whoever brought that into the building, they would say, this was filmed at this time, this is the date, this is the location, this is the story, this was a cameraman, just and that's how you'd find the stuff. And I'm like, I'm actually looking for something. I'm looking for a sentence that was spoken, but this video stuff, right? We didn't transcribe it. We couldn't transcribe it. Speech to text and transcripts was pretty rubbish back then. And it was very slow and very expensive, and it was pretty rubbish as well. So we didn't do it. We just had metadata on all these files. So I set up a company which did speech recognition. And it just bought off the shelf stuff. It was rubbish, but it was good enough. We started using like IBM's Watson, and then we started using some specialist providers, and we built out that business for about 4 years. And then we kind of exited in a kind of roundabout way to a team inside the UK Parliament, where speech and knowing what's said inside Parliament is super important. So that back then was called machine learning. We didn't use the term AI. Artificial intelligence was like something that if you were in the industry, you say like, I do ML, right? We don't do AI. Sci-fi writers do AI. Machine learning was the field. I would really kind of push back if somebody even used that term, because I just thought, well, it's not intelligence, right? It's just pattern recognition. And that's true today, right? The thing is not intelligence, it is still just pattern recognition.
Nor is it artificial.
Nor is it artificial. I mean, right, it's as artificial as anything else we make. It's just an evolution of what we were doing before, but it's kind of turned a corner and it does this new thing. But it is not like a new breed of anything. And is just, I mean, it was just when they came, 2020, a bunch of stuff kind of happened at the same time. The Transformer arrived, attention arrived. We begun to realize that if we just throw compute and data at that same problem and those same algorithms that we had been working with for a long time, right? If we just went and just worked at a different scale, suddenly this strange thing happened, right? Next word prediction, next token prediction begun to get super accurate. And that was then the thing that, a lot of these frontier labs and then now the hyperscalers, whether it was OpenAI or whether it was Anthropic, whoever you want, leaned into, and they have just extrapolated that out. But that's effectively the same play, right? It's just a scaling play. And we end up with this thing that we now call artificial intelligence or generative intelligence, which is really kind of the useful part of it for us.
What's interesting, when I was researching this, I was trying to think about what underpinned, because looking superficially, if you will, your leap from journalism, software design to AI outcomes manager delivery. With the word delivery comes a lot, so I want to explore that later on as well. But actually what underpins it really is data, isn't it? What you've described there from a journalistic perspective is how do we, in the BBC, CNN, wherever, how do we access all of this video, speech data that we have? How can we collate it? How can we manage it? How can we make reference to it in the future? That's almost, correct me if I'm wrong, what you were describing that you were at the frontier of.
Yeah, back then, like the data sets that you were working with back then seem very small comparatively, but they were horrible file formats. Audio's a horrible file format. Video's a horrible file format. They're massive. They're really slow. They're clunky. They're hard to get into. You had like loads of codecs issues on playback and
lots of different formats as well. It's not as if audio and video comes in one nice little
no.
JPEG version. There's lots of versions of it.
It was just wrangling all of these files and all of these formats, and being able to convert everything and transcode everything. And your computers were pretty rubbish and slow. So you would say, all right, I've got this in like 1080. I need to downscale it to 720. That would actually have to then go through a whole kind of transcoding process. And you would only be running that at 1.5. So if it was an hour long, right, you might be able to get through it in 45 minutes, but you still have to sit there for 45 minutes. They were just, the compute was small. The file formats were horrid. The whole thing about multimedia was hard work back then. We take it for granted now. We just, it's been abstracted away. We don't have to trouble ourselves with any of these problems anymore, which is great if you're working in multimedia. But the data side, I mean, we kind of take it for granted now that everything is transcribed. Transcription is a real unlock. OpenAI, I think, were the company who bought out Whisper, open sourced it. And that is just like the most amazingly accurate transcription service. There are a bunch of other transcription companies, specialist transcription companies, like Assembly AI is really good. It does stuff that Whisper doesn't. It does like diarization, really good punctuation, things like this. And you can go and just like plug into Grok, and they're running Whisper, we now have access to unimaginable amounts of information and data, which will be a play to your creative industry if you kind of get into that. And again, that's what generative AI is all trained on anyway.
Yeah, and I think this is the management of data, me dipping into the AI pool, if you will. That's the huge driver. And again, just touching upon what you were talking about, artificial intelligence, that's what it is. It's effectively mathematics, isn't it? What it's studying is the mathematical similarities, whether it's words in a line of a sentence, or mathematical similarities in an image, or whatever it is. And what AI is so strong at is being able to sort of manage that data for us and articulate and transcribe that back to us. So that's super interesting. So I think that what I'd like to do at that point is, because we've gone through a lot of your journey, your background, which is super interesting. And so that's the end of part one, so to speak, and then we'll start dipping really into the AI stuff in part two of the podcast. So thank you so much.
Totally.
Okay, hi everybody, this is part two. So yeah, I think what we've always wanted to do is keep part one more journey and to the individual, and part two focus on the geek stuff with AI. But obviously with Alex, it's difficult to split the two because you're so in that AI world. We've touched upon the sort of inspiration of the sort of point in which you went from that sort of journalistic background into the AI background. So something that we've touched upon, and being a little bit selfish with our company, quite interested in the agent stuff and the technology behind that is something I'm super interested in. So in a sort of presenting it in almost in a layman's terms, could you sort of talk through the process by which someone would go from saying, okay, I would like to target a process, and how AI can help whatever that organization is in terms of how they could use to improve that process to be more efficient? Can you just take us through that whole process?
Yeah, totally. Let's say that you are currently getting inquiries from, and they're quite complicated inquiries from your customers. And maybe you get like 10 of them a day. And, how do they come in? They come in, somebody fills out a form on your website and they want a service from you. But their requirements are always very bespoke and niche and specific. So you have to take those emails, you come in, you have to read through them. You have to go, yeah, well, I can do this or I can't do this. And then you got to price it up. And then you got to look at your diary and you've got to go, well, we can probably do this at this time. Then you might, send that person back an email, right? And the email might say, yeah, thank you very much for your inquiry. We can definitely help you out. It's going to cost you roughly this much money. And we probably can do this in 7 weeks time, something like that. I mean, maybe, the industry is something like film and TV, right? And they're looking to hire some kind of, kit or equipment for a shoot they're doing. All right. Just hypothetical. Okay. You are going to convert that into the amount of hours that it actually takes. And you are going to say, well, that took that person 3 hours to do all that work, right? They looked at their stock. They did this. Their rate is £50 an hour or £30 an hour, whatever it is, right? So you get a dollar value from every inquiry that comes in. And that's kind of where you start because you've got to benchmark stuff. If you're going to then implement anything, before you get to the tech, you've got to know actually what are these doing at the moment. One person is going to be absolutely fully loaded and you will have staffed your business so that they're running at about 80% capacity anyway. So this is typically what you find when you go in and they say, we're getting more and more inquiries. Sue over here is finding it really hard to keep up with stuff. We're finding that stuff is getting dropped, stuff is getting missed, the quality is going down. She's working extra hours or something like this. So you start with the problem. If you want like an absolute kind of start to finish process. Okay. So you would then say, okay, no problem. Let's take that form on your website and replace it with an agent. Okay. So you're going to build the agent in some way, shape or form. You can go totally bespoke. You can go off the shelf. There are a million providers like Intercom or some other chatbot will do it, right? But how you do it doesn't really matter so much, but you're going to have to take that information in. And before it gets to Sue, right, it's going to go to Claude or it's going to go to some GPT model or it's going to go to whatever model you want to use. The models don't matter. The AI doesn't matter. They're all the same broadly. Unless you're doing something super specialist, you can go and use whichever you want and jump between them. And I would say be totally agnostic. But you're going to have somebody who's vaguely technical enough to take off that current type form or whatever you've got, sort of Google Forms or whatever you've got sitting on your website where you're collecting that first information and replace it with something agentic that can then plug into some kind of database or spreadsheet to collect that information.
So that's the first interface that a company would use within the agent instead of it. They wouldn't directly engage with a Gemini or a ChatGPT. There would be already something separate to that would have dialogue with.
Most likely. And I only say that because, frankly, why speak in hypotheticals all the time? Why not get a little bit specific? Thing is, if you're going to use a type form, and it probably has this functionality, I haven't looked at it for ages, but if you're going to use one of those kind of, forms, which were very prevalent pre 2020, when collecting customer inquiries was the thing that websites generally did, everything from WordPress to Squarespace to all of these web builders would have some kind of, form, some inbound kind of data capture thing. Right. But the thing is, they can't do conversational turns. So they can't kind of somebody goes, oh yeah, do you have a camera, that shoots like this? Or do you have a lens that does this if you're going to use the TV and film industry? The form would be inbound, read only, right? It wouldn't be able to go and say, hey, we don't do that type of stuff. We only do this type of stuff. So to do conversational turns like a proper agent, you're probably going to need to have something on your site which is bespoke. And every project is a little bit different. So it's always bespoke at the moment. But fortunately, building these things is becoming increasingly fast and cheap and easy. So bespoke isn't any issue because coding's been broadly solved. But once you have that on the website, customer lands, has a little conversation, you capture their inquiry, you post it to some spreadsheet. can be a Google Sheet, can be an Airtable, can be, whatever you want, right? But you're going to kind of capture that stuff. And then you can have the agent do something further with the information. So you say to the user, hey, thank you very much for your inquiry. We'll get back to you. And instead of passing it to Sue, right, what you then do is you have the agent. It's just like if you're going to use a really simple kind of Vercel application or something, it will just have a prompt, like the stuff that you write. Broadly speaking, the stuff that you write, it has a text file, which is part of the app. You've uploaded it to whatever you're hosting the app. As I said, Vercel is the obvious choice. And it will basically say, get this information. These are the products and services that you do. These are the things that you don't do. This is your price list. And you then send that over to whichever model you're using. You can use Anthropic, you can use OpenAI, you can use open source models, you can use Mistral, whatever you want to use. They're all the same broadly. And it will just say, take the inquiry, do this with the inquiry, like price it up. If you want to go and plug it into your calendar, you can do that. Find out when we're next available to do this. Okay. If you want to go and plug it into your stock, you can do that, right? It's just another connection. It's just another API. Really simple to do. Find out if our stock is available. Okay, this is before we've gone back to Sue. So what we've done is we've put an agent in between the customer and Sue. So when she then goes into her environment, that might be something like a Google Sheet, right? It might be something like an Airtable. She doesn't just get the customer's inquiry. She gets the customer's inquiry. She gets the price of the job. She gets a timeline of when it can happen. It's already checked the calendar. It's already checked the stock. You can do it. So at that point, and it's already written the email back to the customer. So Sue just copies that cell, puts it into an email, sends it to the customer. What you're doing is you're looking for areas where Sue's just middleware between two systems anyway, right? She's sitting there just doing the connection between the customer and the email send button anyway. And I'm like, we can replace that whole thing. What we can't replace is Sue's judgment, Sue's human in the loop, to make sure that quality is there, because the thing generally doesn't care like we care. It cares in a very different way and about very different things. So suddenly we've optimized the process, and the person who was previously running that process is now able to be more like an airline pilot, right? They can fly the plane. They're definitely needed at takeoff and landing, but otherwise they're, twizzling knobs, checking systems, making sure everything works as it should do. That's kind of where we are right now. It's very early process transformation. Like in practical terms, that's the type of stuff that companies are doing bit by bit. There's a lot more to it. There's things like making sure that the quality standards are high, making sure that it's a very robust process, making sure that the system doesn't fall over, handling all the edge cases, making it very polite, keeping tone of voice, doing all of the other stuff to make sure that it's a really good service. But at its heart, we're just looking at areas where we kind of go, Sue, like, you shouldn't be doing that. That's really just, you're just being middleware between these two systems. We should replace that with kind of an AI agent of sorts. And your job can now actually go to a higher level of abstraction, and you can actually start doing stuff that you find really difficult, which is client management, which is, making those difficult trade-offs where there is no right answer, and going, well, we're going to do that because, they're a great customer and they've been with us for a long time and we know how they work. Then, they're a new customer. These type of things that only a person can do and focus on, only a person should do and focus on. The other stuff, we can create little agents to redesign that process.
Yeah, and there's a lot there I was reading a Sunday Times article, and the journalist was, I forget the name, but he was, the point of the article was his daughter was 16, about to potentially jump into the world of university, and he wanted to be a really good dad and research the world on the back of this new artificial intelligence technology, life language knowledge, however you want to refer to it, say, well, okay, what's the best guidance I can as a dad to make sure I guide her in the right direction? Software engineering and CGI artist, probably not the best route to go to right now. So on the back of that research, a lot of what it was talking about was emotional intelligence, whether it's marketing and social media guidance or psychologists or something like that. It's that human touch, isn't it? Which is what you're talking about in a sense of judgment. Because the judgment needs, it's human intelligence. It's emotional intelligence, which is hopefully the one thing that the AI won't be able to replicate.
Yeah, well, won't be able to replicate it for the time being. They keep on threatening that it will be soon, but I always say, well, we don't live in soon, we live in the time being. And so I can only do what I can do right now. Apparently, all bets are off in 2 years and there's nothing that is going to be outside of its control. But they'd be saying that for 2 years anyway. So who knows? It may arrive, it may not. But if you're looking at right now, the areas, you just got to have a good steer on what it's very good at and a good view on what it's not very good at, right? It's not very good at anything to do with judgment. It's not, and those, as you say, those kind of very human instincts, because it can't train on them particularly well. So it's super good at coding. Why is it super good at coding? Because it's something that it can train on really well, right? And you've got to understand some of the fundamentals to know where to use it and where not to use it. So you would say, for example, it's super good at coding because if you gave it a coding challenge, it's a bit like maths. There's a right answer and a wrong answer, and it's been able to spin up a sandbox and solve that problem 10,000 times until it's able to just, in its training data, get to the right answer very, very quickly because it's able to replicate that problem. And so it can train itself to be good at coding. You can't really do the same with human judgment because you can't, there is no right or wrong answer.
It's not binary.
It's not binary. Every answer is going to be a bit different. So it can't train so well to be great at human judgment. Now they would say that they can have an agent as a judge, which is going to kind of get to a point where it agrees with a human view on a problem about 80% of the time. And humans generally agree about 80% of the time. But there's this curiosity, which is you're giving the agent a target, and as soon as you kind of give it a target, it almost tries to game the training process, and it gets very, very good at getting to that. But because if you're going to go with architecture, design me a building which is compliant with the regulations in this local authority, it will be able to do that because those are definable kind of outcomes. So it's going to be able to do that. Build a building which sits really well in a street is not going to be able to do that because that is a judgment call and everybody's going to have a different opinion on it. So it will, for an architect, it will always struggle to do that type of work. Maybe, as I said, maybe in 2 years it's going to do it, but I don't think that anybody's always going to agree with the outcome of what is beautiful. That's going to be a judgment that you kind of go, well, I think this is beautiful and that's the product I'm selling. It will always be able to build a compliant building, but it won't necessarily be able to build or design a beautiful building. And I think that's kind of scratching at what you're talking about with judgment.
And at the core, the reason why we set the podcast up, if I may be so blunt, it's not really a paradox, but it's the mathematical, it's the binary, it's yes or no. So again, go back to your points on you're able to teach the AI technology, you can teach it to play chess. Because you can teach it to play chess, because in the end, what the simple rule is, I want to win. That's the binary instruction first. And then you can take the rules of chess and tell it, well, this is what the castle does, this is what the pawn does, this is what the king and queen can do. And all of a sudden, on the back of that, it can teach yourself, well, what move do I need to make in order to win? Because it's in a sense of a binary mathematical decision process. And of course, then design becomes something that's a little bit more subjective. So moving on from that, being a little bit architecture, because you've obviously alluded to that a few times, it'd be quite interesting to pick your brain as someone, again, that's in the heart of the sort of movement and quick technological increase that we've got. Where do you see it sitting within the world of architecture?
There's areas of the architectural process which are very relevant to being disrupted by AI systems. And there are areas where it's going to be harder to be disrupted. So, for example, if you go and look at the design process, you're going to put together a floor plan. At the moment, it's getting really good at doing floor plans, but it's not quite there. But the actual tech of doing floor plans isn't particularly AI-ish. It's still CAD, it's still BIM systems. It's not kind of image generation, as it were, because that's actually a kind of if you go and look at the diffusion models that generate these images, they're like super probabilistic. If you give the same input, every output is going to be a little bit different. Whereas a floor plan needs to be kind of like you give it one input and you're going to get one output, and you currently do that through CAD systems. And so the actual image generation of those architectural drawings, they're not really impacted so much. The areas that are impacted are things like the research, looking at the local regulations, looking at the building regulations, looking at what can and can't do, looking at what local authorities are doing. And local authorities are adopting this stuff. Actually, they're really, quite at the forefront of, because their work is interpreting codes and saying, yes, this does or this doesn't, is actually very relevant to what AI is very good at. So on the planning front, you're seeing like a lot of disruption. So there are areas of the process which are going to be really impacted, areas which aren't. I would say that, figuring out a way to build something that actually is in the vernacular and sits well in the street and actually solves lots of competing problems and has a lot of trade-offs, which is generally the job, right? You can have a bigger bedroom or a bigger bathroom, but you can't have a bigger bathroom and a bedroom, and you've got to make that, trade-off and that call. That's something that is a judgment thing, which the architect is generally going to be increasingly, kind of paid for, having that view. The other thing is that the architect is on the line for the work that they put out, whereas AI is not on the line for anything it puts out. So if you have like indemnity or indemnity insurance or something like this, everything that the AI systems generate needs to be signed off by a person, because it's only a person who's liable for that and who's actually willing to put their name beside something. And that's a big part of the job as well. So, I mean, if you're going to go and look at all of the tasks that have to come together to deliver an architect's project, if you're a small architect, right, it's even selecting the contractors, selecting the materials, making sure that everything is priced correctly, working with the builders, all of these things. There are some things which are very relevant to AI. There are a lot of things that aren't. And there are just some things that I don't necessarily see as ever being particularly relevant to how AI works at the moment.
I think there's a few things there. I think certainly you're coming back to this word judgment, which I think is really interesting, and correctly linking that with professional indemnity insurance. We have indemnity insurance, and that's because I'm deemed, with my name being on the door, that I'm an adequate judge and that my judgment can be trusted for designing buildings. The minute that we start to use AI, at the minute when we use it, we're disclosing that we're using it, obviously, because it's still, even though it's not necessarily that new technology, but we haven't got years and years of experience of how this is being integrated. I often think back with the way that AI is booming now. similar to what happened with social media, maybe 20 years ago, if I remember rightly, or Facebook might have been sort of slightly later than that, maybe 2008, 2009. But it took us a while to figure out a society, and we still are. How do we use social media? Is this good? Is it bad? Obviously, you jump forward to now. It's now being banned in schools because we've learned this isn't very good for our brains. So going back to the AI, we are right at the front of how do we truly integrate that within our society? The simple answer is we don't really know yet in terms of our relationship between humans and AI, how this is going to go, do we? And so that judgment call of, has there been, I'm asking this without, I don't necessarily know if you know the answer, but has there been any cases where an architect or any sort of consultant role used artificial intelligence to do their job, and it's obviously led to sort of court cases where they've gone, you can't blame the AI for this because it's purely your judgment. Has this been played out in your experience?
No. It's kind of pretty much, there's no accountability for the models that you use. It's a bit like blaming your printer or something. Ultimately, it's not. You're on the line for the work that you put out.
I blamed the printer in the past.
Fine. You can try that. But
I don't know how much the judge and jury would accept.
Printer don't care. I mean, when you get down to it, right? And these things look like magic and they sound like people and whatnot, but it's just next word prediction. It's just the cat sat on we know it's Matt. And you take that simple thing and you just like extrapolate it to a level that you couldn't imagine. And that's all it's doing. It's just doing next word prediction. Image generation, a bit different. Diffusion models, a bit different. But for the most part, the difficulty is it sounds like a person, right? It sounds like there's a voice in the machine, and it's probabilistic rather than deterministic. So previously, pre-2020, all of the systems we used were deterministic, right? They were basically if that then this statements. Whereas now it's probabilistic, right? We give a probabilistic number to the next token being something. So that's why you can give the same input 1,000 times and you can get 1,000 similar but slightly different outputs because the probability never lands exactly where the last one landed. So there are kind of curiosities, but it's still just ML. It's still just machine learning. It's still just like an evolution or an iteration, not a revolution of what we had before. I kind of keep that in mind, but practically for architects, for me right now, I think that the art of architecture and making those trade-offs and making those judgment calls, and the legal side, right, that's still firmly, that can't be replaced. Don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. Whereas if you're running a small architecture practice, say you've got 5 to 15 people or something like this, right? We can revolutionize the business of architecture, which is the client management, the communication, the marketing, the comms, right? Finding new projects, being more visible, optimizing how the practice works, okay? Looking at all of those systems, the 80% of the work that happens below the waterline that you don't see, you only actually see those beautiful renders of the projects that you've done, right? That's the iceberg on top that every architect kind of like showcases and sells. But actually, if you go below that, you've got customer support, right? You've got SEO for your website. You've got all of this stuff. Like all of that stuff can be massively impacted, and that will make a meaningful difference to a practice's revenue and profitability, and how many staff they can employ, and whether those staff are maxed out or not maxed out, how many projects they can keep across, how you communicate with your builders, how you communicate with your projects, optimizing all of that stuff, huge impact. Designing something and saying like, this is why I think that's a beautiful building. I think that's going to firmly stay the job of the architect. There is a couple of, that's the positive view. couple of negative views. The career ladder is being impacted. So you're going to be automating a lot of your research. So like, we're going to be building here in Ealing, for example. Find me everything to similar buildings to this that have been done in Ealing. That used to be the job of a junior who would come in and they would then be pouring through all of the previous projects. And through that process, they would be becoming really good at the job. They would be looking at how Ealing Council, thought, what it wanted, the local authorities code, what they approved, what they didn't approve, all of this stuff. That's how actually somebody trained to become an architect in the first instance, through doing that. And that's going to be taken over by AI systems as planning increasingly becomes digital. So you won't be giving those jobs to a junior. So they're going to find it very difficult to kind of go through that same process to become an expert in their field, because those entry level jobs are going to be given to agents. So there's a career ladder impact that we have yet to figure out how to solve. So that's on the downside, as it were.
Yeah, and I'm always minded of a business coach that I spoke to, and he always said that you need to keep a diary of your time because you need to focus on the high value tasks as opposed to low value tasks. Sounds to me as if what you're talking about is that AI could do a lot of those low value tasks. The checking, sending emails, checking your diary, sending invoices. The high value tasks, they're the judgment tasks, aren't they? Because the high value tasks is, how good are you at your job? Is this person better than that person? I want their judgment. And that's all they're really based upon. And so the high value tasks are that judgment based, whether it is, where do we see the building movement, where do we see the building industry and the company moving forward, and also the talent of creating those beautiful buildings that you're talking about. But just referencing, you've referenced a few times public sector planning and how they're adopting that quite quickly. Quite interested in that again when I was looking through your background. I noticed that you worked on an application called block type, and that for a development company that would almost harvesting that data on their ability to assess random development sites. And again, it's data driven, isn't it? Because is it in a conservation area? Is it a listed building? How close is it to a tube station? How close is it to a road? Easements, etc., etc., etc. So do you see that? Was that AI driven technology? The block type stuff? Was that your sort of influence on that?
I don't know. So block type is amazing app, which effectively wanted to take any potential development site and looking at the limitations of where it was located. So the local authority, right? How high, how many floors could it have? How many windows did it need? How many parking spaces did a unit of this have to have? And which would then tell you how big its footprint could be, how many people were allowed to live within that footprint. These type of constraints would ultimately give you the profitability of that site. That is deterministic software. That's not AI software. Mm-hmm. That is like, if that, then this, right? We can just do that by looking at the inputs and saying, well, that's going to generate that output. You don't need AI to do that. But that's not to say that block type wasn't an amazing tool. The thing that made block type possible was the idea of that kind of movement of making planning digital.
Sure.
And making that information available so that it could actually look at what are the constraints in that specific location.
Well, there must be an AI role to connect those dots in terms of, from a planning perspective, and, having all of the planning application data there in terms of what's been refused, what's been consented, not necessarily the judgment calls, but AI could help with the data that says, well, nearby, this application was refused. These are the reasons for refusal, and that could therefore be plugged into certain application sites, couldn't it? So I'm quite intrigued. If we look towards the end of we're getting towards the end of the podcast in terms of the vision moving forward. I'd be quite interested to get your thoughts on this, on how AI could be used within that planning field, taking the block type almost as a concept, but then just timesing it by 1 million.
As the planning process of local authorities increasingly becomes kind of digitized and statistical, and they open up more APIs to let people at that information, it's going to be table stakes to say, if a developer comes to you with a possible site, it's going to be table stakes to say, yeah, you can do this, but you can't do that. And this is basically where it's going to get to. That is something that you can do at the moment, right? There's no magic in that. You just give it to a junior, right? They're going to go and pull up the local plan. They're going to look at the rules around that. They're going to do, keyword search, right? Hit Control F on their keyboard, find some of those words, look at the applications that have been granted and denied, in the surrounding area. It will take them a day or so. So it's going to cost you 300 quid. And you're going to then do a report on that and give it back to the developer and say, this is basically what you're looking at, what is probable and what is not. And I can maybe even do some drawings of what is possible and probable. And I can even tell you roughly how much it's going to cost to put together and how much you might be able to sell that on the market right. How far do you want to go in that direction? It would take somebody a day. It would take somebody 3 days to put together and you might actually bill it out for I don't know how many thousands and make a bit of money on it. Anyway, that's just going to be done for you because that's just what it's really, really good at. So you're not going to be able to make money doing that, but you'll be able to then kind of, spend more time on the design. You're going to be able to go further into that process. I think one of the big problems is for a business where your model is, time and materials. When AI comes along, the one thing it does is it means that you can do a job in less time. And you go, oh, that's amazing. But you don't want to do a job in less time because the less time it takes, the less you get to charge. What you want to do is you want these emerging systems to allow you to do new things. So you have to think about, well, it's going to compress how much time it takes for me to do some of the tasks I do at the moment. And again, right, an architect's practice, like any business, is just a collection of tasks that you are doing, like chains with links. Input in, which is generally energy for a service company, which is generally people hours and times by rate, and output, which is product or service and whatever you sell it, and hopefully the output is higher than the input. AI is going to change that, is going to compress how quickly you can do stuff. If your business model is time and materials, it's not great because you end up charging less and they know how long it takes to do something. So it's not like you can charge the same. You've got to, first of all, before you do any of this implementation, you've got to look at the impact on your business and you've got to change your model to value-based pricing. And you've also got to think, if it allows me to do these other things, if it allows me to do the stuff I do right now faster, what can I do with that spare time? What other areas can I get into? What other things can I do? You might go, well, you might get into, QSing, or you might get into another part of the business which you previously couldn't do that aren't going to be so impacted or something like this. I think it's a huge impact on your business model. And especially you've got to really think about, the tectonic kind of shifts and the direction of travel. And if you're charging for the amount of time it takes to do something, and that's the metric that you bill and add something onto, and AI comes along and compresses that, you're going to make less money. So you've got to be thinking about, how do I go to value-based pricing first? These are the type of things that you want to consider.
Value-based pricing. I think that's an amazing place to end, because I totally agree with you that the future is architects focusing on the things that are high value and that are reliant on talent and judgment as opposed to the churn, for want of a better word. So thank you so much, Alex, for coming on to our podcast. It was fascinating speaking to you, and hopefully everyone else has enjoyed listening to it. Thank you so much. Take care.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.